this is Reimagined Together, where every week I typically go live with a wide array of speakers to talk about what a thriving humanity future really means and the little steps that we can take today to bring about a better tomorrow. This week, I wanted to give you the gift of our conversation that we had at a virtual gathering actually back in August. This gathering brought together a bunch of different minds, so you will hear reference to other people throughout the dialogue, but the main focus of the dialogue was between Jermaine Suggs, Global Director of Diversity and Inclusion at Johnson Controls, and Matutine Experience co-host Hanlie Van Wyk, Diversity and Inclusion coach and co-founder of Changecraft. I hope that you enjoy this dialogue as much as we did, and that you can find little precious insights that you can apply in the months to come.
Jump right into, if you could give us, you have such an interesting journey with how you came into your role. I love your stories.
I don't think you have that much time. So.
We'll try. I'll try to contain it. I'll try.
Okay. So I'll just talk about Johnson Controls. I've been with the organization since 2012. I started off as a sales professional, a contributor. In 2016, I became a sales leader for the New York City metro market. And in 2018, I became a sales leader for the New Jersey market. And just recently, 4 weeks ago, I had resigned from the organization. I had resigned. I was moving on. The interesting thing is that, I know I wanted to be in a position where I can impact change and I can make more decisions, but I didn't quite know what that was. So for me, I was just going to go be a sales leader somewhere else. And something amazing happened, so when I resigned, I thought they were just going to say, okay, see you later, walk me to the door. A lot of executives were calling me, was like, listen, don't leave, think about it. And then they told me about this position about being Global Director of Diversity and Inclusion. And I said, ever in my career or my life, where can I impact change and change the narrative? Because when I first started in the particular office I was in, nobody on the floor looked like me. But I never let race be the forefront of what I did. I just put the work into it because I was raised by my grandmother, who always taught me that, we're all, put together by this thread called humanity, right? So I took the role, and it's been an awesome 30 days. I can't even explain to you the feeling I get every day that I get up. It's almost like a human role. Like it was almost like, I feel like in life when you chase things, they don't quite work the same way, but when it pulls you, it brings you to like you're coming with, like you emerge into something else. And if you would have told me 20 years ago I would have been a director of diversity and inclusion, I probably would have laughed at you. But the fact that I'm in a role where I can help all people, I feel very blessed and humbled. So that's the short version.
Okay. I like the short version, but I am going to ask very quickly that we address a little tangent or passion that you had earlier on that had to do with the entertainment industry. You have to share that.
Oh my goodness. So in my early days, in my early 20s, I wanted to be an R&B sensation. I sing. I had a developmental deal with Universal Records. Singing and music was my passion. I can remember the first play I was in was The Wizard of Oz. I wanted to be the Scarecrow, and I didn't get the role. And I'll never forget, I went home and I told my grandmother, and I was very upset. And then the gentleman Darryl who had the role got sick, and I was the Scarecrow. So being on stage, it did something for me because I felt like I can express myself. So I've always been a creative type. The one thing that I love about sales is that it doesn't care about your ethnicity, your gender, or where you're from, or your W-2, or what's your zip code. As long as you produce, you're validated. So sales took me in, and I was able to express my creativities through it and also interact with people, which I love to do. So, yeah.
Amazing.
Thank you, Carly, for letting me tell people I used to be an R&B.
Yes, you're so welcome. I think it's really important because one of the reasons, one of the stories that I forgot to mention too in the beginning for why we're doing this, how to create space for hard conversations, it was my artistic side that really was drawn into this idea of creating space, because as creatives, as actors, as musicians, we know that we're not all of a sudden the final product.
Right.
And we create.
And we're not all cut from the same cloth.
Exactly. And we create these little rehearsal spaces that are safe spaces to be vulnerable, to be wrong, to stumble and to fall. And so how can we, I think creatives are used to that process, but how do we globally, nationally, at organizational and individual levels, create that safe rehearsal space for the mess of transformation?
I think the misconception about leadership is that there's a format for it. Like you can read all these books and then it'll connect. That is farther from the truth. Yeah. It's literally you talking to yourself inwardly and figuring a way to execute it outwardly. Mm-hmm. It's the most vulnerable space in the most lonely position you can be in. And when I say lonely, because you're always second guessing or questioning, am I making the right move? Now, there are leaders that just follow a rigid path, right? And they have a target in sight and they may hide in their office or deal with spreadsheets and things of that nature. But true leadership is vulnerability and serving, right? So the more in tune you are with yourself, the more self-reflection you do, you're able to help people. I've always wanted to see people win. Always been fascinated by people's uniqueness and talents. For the fact that Dawn's on this call right now, I've always been fascinated with her ability to be aggressive when most people would fold. Mm-hmm. And I think to myself, okay, so how do I coach that? I don't coach it down. I don't tell her who she is or her true being is not acceptable. I just try to figure out how do I put her in a situational scenario where she can win, right? Because not everyone comes from the same upbringing. Not everyone comes from the same background. I always hear people say, oh, I got to work on my weakness. Why? Why not capitalize on your strength? At best, your weakness is going to be average. I'd rather you dominate your strength, right? To overshadow the fact that you're weak. Here's a fact. I'm not handy at all.
Are we talking about like domestic handiness?
Yeah. I'm not handy at all, right? But I can sure call a contractor, negotiate terms, make sure the legal is right, and make sure the deposit is right, and make sure it gets done. But I can't hammer the nail into the wall, but I know my strengths, right? I can talk in front of 10,000 people, I'm good. Yeah. But I know my strengths. And I think what happens in a corporate setting, if you don't have a sense of belonging, then you don't strengthen what inclusion is. It's funny. Diversity is the what, inclusion is the how, right? Mm-hmm. My job is to protect and strengthen the culture. And that means letting everybody know, no matter what your uniqueness is, no matter what your creativity is, you are accepted. And I think that's the direction organizations are going into. Think about it like this. It is very exhausting to pretend to be someone that you're not 8 hours or more a day. Think about how exhausting that is. Think how much productivity you don't have. But imagine if you're embraced as you are, right? You're accepted as you are. Imagine how much productivity you can get out of that person, right? They're not wearing the mask. They're not wearing the facade. They can just be them. They're comfortable. They're not looking behind their back. They're not wondering, I wonder if anybody judging me. They could be immersed in their full self and dominate. That's what we want as human beings, is to just have a space to be ourselves.
Absolutely. And, on that note, as we kind of get into, in today's climate, especially, I just love to see, again, your posts and how you handle yourself right now.
Right.
And I just wanted to hear your perspective, especially when things are so tense and there are so many problems globally that are glaring at us that need to be dealt with. But what do you see as the role of leaders in these, in this climate? How can we do our best to make sure that we're moving in a productive direction?
I think first and foremost, first thing you have to admit to yourself is that it's bad. I think leaders sometimes get in this way where they try to sell to their employees, no matter what the role is, that, yeah, it's going to be fine. Well, no, that I don't think that's the approach. The approach is you need to assess the climate and the challenges of what's going on, and then ask yourself, what is it right now do my employees need? For me, it's a simple concept. How are you, and are you okay? Goes a long way. Start there, right? Even if they reply in a way that you know you can't help, they know that you're listening, right? I think the challenge is that managers are not emerging through these challenging times because never before, I think, that we had to deal with being self-aware. Right. You can hide behind the spreadsheets, you can hide behind the metrics, you can hide behind the targets, right? All those things are important, don't get me wrong. But now you got to deal with the human. You got to figure out why this particular individual is having some challenges. And it can be anything. If you're working remote and you're a working mom, guess what? Can you really get a lot of work done with your kids running around? If you're a working dad and you used to be in a road warrior and now you got to make this 360 transition of being home. Can you imagine the bandwidth of where you're going and that being tied to your ego? So I think you have to be self-aware in this climate, but more importantly, I used to tell my team, this sucks. What's happening sucks, right? Get in front of it. This sucks, but guess what? This is what we're going to do. We're going to rally and we're going to unite. I have this saying that I always say, listen, we're going to braveheart it out. Now, listen, at the end, they died. Guess what? They didn't think they would.
Yeah, I always right? Like, we'll have a different ending, but the rest of the story we'll see.
But we're going to braveheart it out. You know what I mean? So I think you have to exhibit the behavior that you want your employees to model. But one thing I need leaders to understand, though, you got to take care of yourself in that format, right? For me, I get up every day. I practice gratitude. I practice like the strategy of what I need to say. Light touches. Text your employees, right? Send motivational quotes on a Monday to start the tone of the week, right? If an employee does something great, text them personally. You crushed that. Good job. If an employee is having a challenging time, you text them. Listen, I know what just happened is not ideal, but we're going to figure this out together. You just have to, you have to be a human manager, not a micromanager.
Definitely. And that again gets back to kind of something that we talked about earlier, and I'm sure will come up on this call and with Hanlie's address, Hanlie's presentation too, as we look at this through different lenses. The fact that we haven't taught people how to be human. So we're dealing with the fact that we have not done any of this work. And it's kind of like, it's kind of hard to go anywhere until we start.
So you and I had a conversation, Carly, that I said, if there's any benefit, well, you know what, let me reframe that. Here's the thing about the quarantine and the pandemic. You will be reintroduced to who you really are. There is no running away from it. Your demons, your hang-ups, you will be come face to face with who you are. And here's the thing, something amazing is going to happen. You are actually going to understand your triggers. You're going to know the things you need to work on, and you're going to know the things that you probably hid while you were grinding, right? Because remember, before the pandemic, everybody's grinding, they're working, doing late nights, and they have no idea how to be still and just be quiet. My grandma always used to tell me, JJ, be still, be still. And as a kid, I'm like, what is she talking about? I'm 7 now, I understand. And pretty much she's telling me to embrace the present. That's what she meant. Saying embrace the present. And I think if you embrace the present and stop future tripping, like I call it, because we have a tendency to future trip. Think about it. You're having a successful present and you're thinking about, oh, I got to do this now. Well, no. Feel that. Appreciate that. Pat yourself on the back. and then go what's next.
Great. And for you, on an individual level, before we start diving into the details with Hanlie a little bit more, because I'm very much looking forward to that. On an individual level, how are you measuring your success right now as a leader in this space? And what measurement of success at your organization too is going to say, hey, we're doing good. I'm doing good. This is what success looks like.
Well, for me, I always end my day saying, who did I help? And did I get them over that threshold, whatever that hurdle was? It could have been something as simple as an administration hurdle, could have been a financial hurdle in regards to an internal struggle with something or an external with a customer. All you can do is take incremental steps each and every day. That's all you can do. And for me, every day I wake up and I say, okay, I put things in four buckets, right? Who needs my immediate help? Who needs my help in regards to the strategy? Who needs my help to lend an ear when they're going through something personal that's pouring on to their professional? Because that's the thing. People tend to think that how business is going is not a direct correlation to how your life's going. It's all connected, right? So some people might go, well, Jay, I don't have time for that. I'm not a therapist, touchy-feely. Well, guess what? If these individuals don't feel like you fully support them, you're not going to see the best in them. They're going to shut down. And when they shut down, it's going to impact their work. So for me, measuring is how many people can I help? Now, there's some days I feel like, have I done enough, right? But those are the days I say to myself, you know what? My intentions and my effort was where it needed to be. So I'm going to have to let that go. As far as an organization, right now, Johnson Controls is going through a shift. I can feel it. I haven't felt it for the 7.5 years more now than I feel it now, where the top down, bottom up, and the middle out are all talking. We're having like courageous conversations. I mean, CEOs are no longer being so conservative. They're really saying how they feel. And George Oliver, our CEO, is taking his stance on how he feels about things. That's what employees need to see. They need to feel that needs to resonate. And that's what strengthens the culture. So for me, my measure of success, did I help enough people today? My measure for success for the company is the culture getting stronger, going into the direction where we realize we're better united.
Beautiful. And as we now, it's just great to kind of get through some of that high level, and again, your perspective on leadership, which I think is so lovely. But Hanlie, if you want to jump in at this point and kind of walk us through a way of understanding this idea of, how to create space, all the different ways that we can create space for hard conversations.
Exactly.
Yes.
And I want to sort of tie onto what Jay was saying around the organization, that he's feeling that there's a change happening in the organization. And one of the things that I've always noticed is that you can't expect people to behave differently if you don't create the conditions in the company for that to happen. So
exactly.
Part of what we're trying to do is to say, create those conditions, because if you create them, it makes it easy for people, or easier at least, to have these conversations, to make the connections, to do what it is that they need to do to change the culture from one thing to another.
Yes.
I agree. 100%.
And thanks. And a lot of that came out of me growing up in South Africa and seeing a country change from one thing to another, and really being a person who observed that, because at the time I was a teenager, so there was very little that I could actually do, other than protest, and had to be very cognizant of what was happening, what the shifts were, what was happening with people's behavior, how was the leadership behaving, how did they create a space for very difficult conversations between two parties who were not even on the same, they were totally misaligned, and the difficulty that took to move that forward in a way that the country could get to a point where it could say, we've made this transition, there are very difficult things, people have gone through immense adversity to get to this point. How do we take the sting out of it? How do we how do we lower the tone so that we can have these very difficult conversations? And so that's really where my heart and my passion has always been, is to say, how do we do that? If a country can do that, couples can do that, you can do that, a company can do that, but we need to help guide people to the how, because no one teaches you this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
You got to figure it out yourself, and if it's sometimes really difficult, because you have to make big mistakes sometimes to know that, okay, I can say this, or I can't say that, or I didn't handle that very well, or my level of self-awareness was taking a little vacation when I was having that meeting or that moment with somebody. And so that's really what my passion is, to bring people around the how. Just give them some things where they can hang their hats on and say, all right, I'm going to try this, or I'm going to try that, or here's a little pathway when I'm stuck that will get me out of this piece. And I'm now having part of my PhD at the moment is to look at hate victimization and how we can prevent that, because it does seem to be a cycle. And I can see in America now how that is happening, and I can see a lot of that play out. And when I speak to a lot of my friends, my South African friends, we have sort of a sense of deja vu, like, okay, we've seen this before. We've noticed these kinds of things before. We know what's coming next. And we know now, because of our experience, how to galvanize, how to have these conversations. And I think many people in America don't yet have those skills, because it's a little bit new to be having this. It's not that this is a new subject, it's just a new iteration of it. And so for me, in terms of the framework that we use, is to say, first, I always say, first, look at your motivation. Why do you want to have this conversation? If you're trying to have this conversation because you're trying to win, or you're trying to be right, take a minute, go somewhere and rethink your motivation, because that is not going to get you anywhere. So your why for the conversation, and why you want to engage, or why you want other people to engage, is critically important. The second piece is, do you actually have the skills? Do you know how to have these conversations? Do you have enough background information to know what language to use, how to approach something? And if you don't have the skills, go find the resources and make sure that they bring those skills if you don't have them. And also, do you have the confidence? Have you practiced? Have you tried this before? And sometimes you've got to do that to learn, and that's also okay, but at least have a sense of awareness around that. Then there will be barriers that you will experience, like things that you will struggle to get past. And often that's like internal, and Jay, you were speaking a lot about that kind of internal thing. How do you manage yourself? How do you regulate your own emotions? How do you keep yourself calm? Because sometimes things will get a little bit heated up, and that might be the barrier, or you might be worried that that's going to be something that's going to come up for you. So how do you overcome the barriers that might get in your way? And then there's always temptations, because at the end of the day, we are tempted back to old behaviors. We'll have these conversations now, and that's something that I really passionately hope right now, is that this thing will not fizzle out. I want people to stay on it. I want them to not be tempted to go back and say, as you said, it's okay, everything's going to be fine, everything will go back to normal if we just ignore it for long enough. Or, be careful not to be tempted away to try and sidestep these kinds of conversations. Sometimes you just got to knock them on the head. And that's a hard thing to do, because it makes you vulnerable. You have to try things that you haven't tried. You have to understand that maybe you're not going to be comfortable doing this, and it's okay. And that you're learning. And that is true for you as an individual, but it's also true for your team. It's also true for the people that you're working with. The same story, like, do they have the right skills to be able to do that and to have these conversations and create spaces for it? Do they know how to have the conversations, how to make sure they don't step on each other's toes too much, or to have a difficult conversation and find the common ground? Because that's a very tricky and hard thing to do. And are you, as a manager or a leader, skilled to facilitate those conversations? Because sometimes they require facilitation. And so we go through the same, we call them powers. Like, what is your power of motivation? Like, what is your real motivation to do this? Do you have the skills, the competence and confidence to do that? Do you understand what the barriers are going to be that are going to get in your way? And do you know what your temptations are when you are trying to kind of fall back onto old behaviors? because letting go of your old behaviors is sometimes the very hard thing to do when you're trying to adopt something new. And that transition is the thing that makes you so uncomfortable. And then we move from there into systems. Like, how do you look at systems? How do you evaluate systems? Is this a societal problem? Is this a company problem? Is this a country problem? And you have to look at all the systems that are geared in that way to keep people's behavior in a certain way. And how do you disrupt those systems? Or how do you create new ones, new policies, new procedures, new permissions to allow for those conversations? Because if they are getting in people's way, that might be the thing that's going to stop you having those necessary and very difficult conversations. And the last thing is the actual physical space. And I'm a very big believer in that.
Hanlie's a master of spaces.
And I think it's such an it's misunderstood and underutilized. We call them context, because you have the context of self, me, my beliefs, my filters, my thoughts, my emotions. We have social, how do we interact with each other? How do we contage each other's behaviors? Because it's very much my behavior can transfer into someone else's behavior. Like, they know rudeness, for example, in a organization is contagious. If someone starts being rude, more people start being rude. Really? So to be aware of that contagion, obviously the policies and procedures are very important, but the physical space, how do you create a physical space that is safe for someone to be in, to have the conversation? Even in schools, we're doing some research for schools now, for the LAUSD school district, and even for the children, to just know there's a counselor. I can just go sit in their office and just be there. I don't have to talk to this person, but it's a minute that I can take out of my day to feel like, all right, I need a minute. I need to gather myself. I need to think about things. Just having that space is so valuable for people. And I think very often at work, in work spaces, we don't think about creating those spaces where people can pause and they can collect themselves, or they can just go sit with someone and say, I just need you to be with me for a minute while I'm moving into the next piece. And so creating a physical space, I think, often has a lot of power in it. And if you are a leader, to make sure that you have that inviting physical space where someone can come into your office or meet you in a meeting room where they know they can be vulnerable, they are going to be okay. It speaks volumes to have that, rather than just trying to do it on the fly. And so sometimes I say, actually create the physical space, make it nice, make a therapy room, make a meditation room, make whatever, make a
rehearsal, transformation.
This safe space. Put it there so that people know, okay, when I go there, things like, people are going to leave me alone, or whatever it is that they might need. And so working through this framework of these 4 different contexts, look at the self, understand yourself, understand the other person's point of view, understand group and group behavior and how that works, and how you can leverage that also to create more of the behaviors that you want. What do you do with the physical space, and how do you embed the systems around that to lock it in? And then look at motivation, understand what motivates people. And often that is to a higher purpose, or something that is meaningful, rather than just, something more trivial. Understand that they need skills and competencies and a space to practice some of those skills and competencies, and create that for them. Make sure that you understand that they will encounter barriers, because it is natural in life that we encounter barriers to things. How do you, as a leader, help them overcome those barriers? And in the end, understand that we are always going to be tempted back to our old behaviors, where we are comfortable, where we want to be, and try and think through ways that's going to help people manage those temptations, sit with the discomfort. And I think, Jay, you were saying, just push through this thing, right? Just keep going, because if you slip out of that, it's a bit like exercise. You can't stop for 2 weeks. This is going to be too hard to get back onto the wagon again. So try and just push through the discomfort.
Amazing.
And so those are the kind of how pieces that we try to encourage leaders and companies to use to create these spaces, to create the environment in which these conversations can be possible or more possible than they were yesterday or the day before. And that is what I'm hoping that leaders will do every step of the way. And whether that is around the conversation of diversity and inclusion, and equity and equality, or if that is around any behavior change, it doesn't really matter. It's a completely agnostic framework. You can plug any behavior change into it and work your way through it, because it helps you navigate the kind of things that you will experience and will need to be cognizant of if you want to change a culture or change behavior, the behavior that feeds a culture over a period of time.
Great.
The last thing I'm going to say is two things. One is smaller is better, always. Smaller is better. Do the smallest possible thing, get good at that thing, do the next thing. Don't try and make it big. Small is good. That's the other thing is, it does not take 28 days. Please. Okay. It takes a long time. It takes 66 days. It takes 240 days. It takes time. And so get people to get used to that concept. You don't have one conversation that's over. You have many conversations. And so encourage people to stay the distance. It's a marathon. Pace it, make it small, make it last. Now I'm going to shut up.
Beautiful. No.
No, I love that. Like, it takes as long as it takes.
Yeah.
Life is an infinite classroom. I mean, it's a continuous journey of understanding yourself and the people that you interact with. Hanlie, you said something about like how you work out for 30 days and you give up. Here's the funny thing about that. You know how you work out and you lift weights, and then when you first start, it's like horrible, and your body goes through this whole shock.
Mm-hmm.
Days, all of a sudden, what happens to the weights? They get lighter, and then you need more weight because you're stronger. Just saying.
Definitely.
Exactly.
Jay, I would love to hear from you kind of with what Hanlie was saying when you talk about your organization going through a big shift right now, and even internally for you, what changes, or, you know, in regards to the self, the social, or creating spaces, have you kind of noticed is being done really well right now that's definitely allowing space for transformation for the better?
Well, Carly, I like to simplify complex topics. So I'm just going to simplify this. I am living proof when you embrace a diverse mindset that the possibilities are boundless. And what I mean by that is I am where I am today in my career because I had allyship, I had mentorship, I had individuals that made bold, brave, instinctual decisions that saw something in me that I possibly didn't see in myself at the time. That's how it starts, what Hanlie is saying, those small steps. It doesn't have to be a 42 PowerPoint deck presentation. It doesn't have to be a memo or email blast. It is the one-on-one conversation at a time. Now, does there have to be policies and strategies? Absolutely. But it's really about that connection, right? Opening yourself up. Ego is a heck of a drug. You would be amazed how many people do not make selfless decisions for other individuals because of fear. You'd be amazed. Think about it, managers that manage employees, and they know these employees are like the next on the come up, but they just will not give them that opportunity. Ego, right? Mm-hmm. Imagine if you're fully supportive. What happens? That becomes a part of your legacy, right? Dawn is a part of my legacy. Dawn is a national account rep. National account rep. When I met her, she was a local rep. Number one in the country. Right? And Dawn had a hard struggle dealing with a very man-dominated industry at the time. And I'm not going to lie, she doesn't even know this. There was some times because we sat right next to each other when we were reps, I was thinking to myself, maybe she should throw in the towel. Maybe this is not her environment. Well, guess what? Shame on me, because she defied the odds. So that's my point. It's a decision. It's a conversation. And it's not going to happen overnight. And guess what? Sometimes you might be the minority, no pun intended, in regards to your thinking, right? I always tell this story. Dawn knows who this is. I always tell this story. I interviewed a young lady, and I'll make a long story bearable. I interviewed a young lady who was very poised, very analytical, and she had a marketing background, but she was an introvert. She did an interview. She said, why her and Johnson Controls? Phenomenal. Best interview I ever had in my career. After the interview, I said, hey, what do you think? Oh, she's too mild-mannered. She'll get eaten alive. It won't happen. I'm like, no, I think she's highly intelligent. This is what we need. We already got enough barracudas. I need somebody very poised and composed. Well, guess what? First year, she blew her number out. Second year, she blew her number out. Third year, she blew her number out. And now she's with Dawn, National Accounts. Just saying. You got to have those conversations. You got to take those bold decisions and be brave with your instinctual feeling.
Definitely.
And Jen's now number one. She's actually number one national account AE right now.
Oh, yeah. She's number one. I just saw that. I got to call her.
Great. And any questions, Jay or Hanlie, from either of you, just kind of application of some of these things before we open up to just general questions on, creating more space and these one-on-ones.
I want the participants that's on this call to understand you have to, in order to lead outwardly, you got to deal with yourself inwardly. Yes. And that's not easy. What you see before you did not start this way. You got to tell yourself the truth, even the good and the bad. And just because you think you're talented in something doesn't mean that's what your employees need. Sometimes what they need is not exactly what you're good at. My best conversations with my employees are the ones where I admit maybe I made a mistake. The human conversations. Like, you know what? Maybe I got that wrong. I didn't see it that way. I always say, don't react, assess. I feel that way physically when you're in front of somebody, and right before you send an email, just wait a bit. Ask yourself, why am I feeling this way? What is it about this feedback that I'm getting that's making me feel? I self-regulate like every 5 minutes. You have to. You always have to be conscious of everything that's going on. And Dawn's going to laugh. She knows she drove me nuts. But I understood her. I understood what was important to her, right? But some days she did drive me nuts.
It's so important what you're speaking to also when it comes to leading in these, getting back to kind of disruptive times and how to really work on leadership. What you're speaking to also is this idea of neutrality, that you kind of have to find this neutrality within the self to where you're not being triggered by everything left and right, because it's very hard. It's very hard to see change. Yeah. Hanlie, any questions from?
No, I just on that point, I think it is hard, but it's interesting that I think one of the things that I've learned by being here is that doing mindfulness practice, whatever that is, it could be your gratitude practice, or it could be your, at the end of the day, going for a walk. It doesn't really matter in what shape or form it comes. But that's the time where you practice part of the self-regulation that you have to, do in real life, because you can't learn it while you're doing it. And so take a minute every day or 10 minutes every day just to breathe, just to walk, just to be in the moment and practice some of that, so that when you arrive at work tomorrow, or you have a conversation with your loved one, or someone gets on the phone and triggers you, you've already practiced some of those skills to just say, I'm going to pause, I'm going to take the breath. As Jay was saying, just that, I think if you can learn that as a foundational skill, the difficult conversations are already halfway won. I think when you're off this reactivity piece, where your ego is driving you, or your behavior is driving you, that's where you'll have a very difficult time, I think, being able to sit down and have a difficult conversation. So if you had to take the first step, that's the first step I would take.
Hanlie, would you also say it's okay to feel what you're feeling at the time?
Totally. Totally.
We get so hang up with just like, I can't believe I'm so upset. No, it's all right. Feel it, because that discomfort is a constant reminder that you don't want to accept things the way they are.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's
And I'll
the
tell,
right?
mm-hmm. And I'll tell you a really funny story about that. So Brie and I used to work together. And a few years ago, and we are great friends, but a few years ago, we were in a meeting where I was sitting and I could feel myself just getting angrier and angrier and angrier and angrier in the meeting. And I thought at some point I'm going to have to say something, but if I open my mouth now, it's all going to come out wrong. And so I actually called for a stop in the meeting. I said, please, can I have 5 minutes to just step out? And everyone was like, okay. I stepped out. I ran up and down the stairs for 5 minutes to calm myself down, to like gather my thoughts and say, all right, what is it that what is the problem? What are you really trying to like, what is the problem? What are you trying to solve here? What are you trying to say? And then went back into the meeting and said, here's the thing that's bothering me. But it was literally interrupting what was happening and saying, let me go out, gather myself so that I can have a real conversation that's going to be constructive and impactful and not cause damage. And I think you were saying, Jay, every day you're trying to do something to help somebody else. And so in that instance, it was for me to say, how do I have the conversation and not create unnecessary damage or hurt that is going to be harder to clean up than me taking 5 minutes and running up and down the stairs to calm myself down to have the conversation.
When I first became a leader, I had imposter syndrome. I'm not even my first year in leadership. Dawn remembers me. She probably laughed because I'm not the same person, because I was surrounded by, all these individuals that I was in awe in, right? I was just like, wow, I'm in the room now, right? And, I tried so hard to follow all these different types of leadership styles. I did you do what I say. I did the whole documentation. I did let me stay in the closed room and hide. I did all this stuff. And then, I had a big presentation I'll never forget. And I'm not a PowerPoint person, but they're necessary, right? But I could. And I'll never forget, I felt like it was a script. It was just very robotic. And I went home that night and my wife said to me, and once she said this to me, I think it all connected. She said, don't you ever show up like less than who you are to make other people feel comfortable. I was like, who are you? Like that to me. But when she said that to me, I understood that who we are, the authenticity of who we are, is what makes us all special. Not everyone is the same. And, even though I'm in a technology space, in a buildings technology space, I'm still that person that wants to connect and help people win. So as people are trying to lead, I think they need to understand that they have to put themselves in their leadership approach. It's good to learn fundamentals. It's good to understand, the scenarios and the situational procedural things, but you gotta be you. You have to be, because people feed off of that, right? People feed off of, you know what? Are you being sincere? Do you really care about my well-being? So I think that's important. First year leadership was a very interesting year. Very interesting year. I tried everything. I even wore suspenders, I think. It was cool.
Oh my God. Did that somehow come across as having more authority?
No. Nobody saw him. Don't worry about it. It was just a bad move.
Oh, that's too good to remember that one. Well, before we open up to everybody else, for anyone that has questions, please do think on them. If there's anything in particular, we're talking about hard conversations too right now. So if there's something that without feeling like you have to reveal too much about an individual situation, but something that you're struggling with, finding your leadership role because you kind of just want to rip into somebody, which is always a temptation when we're triggered or things happen. Sorry, that was my event today. So if there is anything that comes to mind, please think of it. And then for Hanlie and Jay, advice on, right now, obviously we're in a highly, highly, highly triggered environment.
Yeah.
And so when, we see it from the self, finding this neutrality, making sure that we're not triggered. But if you are in certain situations and in environments where change does need to happen, or there is to a certain degree, like behavior is harmful, right? In the moment, it's something that needs to be addressed. How do we find that, just recommendations on finding that balance between like, I'm not going to be triggered, but this is like, I do need to kind of put down, there's finding a little bit of that assertiveness or taking, I'm not articulating myself super well, but I hope that it's kind of being communicated.
I understand what you mean. Like you're saying, how do you navigate through the ugliness and hate of the world?
And especially when it's right, we can do it from a distance. I think it's
Right.
one thing, we can work on it. But when it's right there in your face and it's something that needs to, to address it in a healthy way or to
Right.
create space, what would be your recommendation for going about that to where you're not ignoring it?
Right. So for me, it's a balance of a couple of things. So let's talk about COVID when it hit, right? There was all these media outlets telling you every day there was the tally on deaths, right?
Mm.
I was thinking about like, what do I want to feed my mind in order to be able to lead, right? I need to know what's going on with this pandemic because it is a serious, prevalent disease. But at the same time, how am I helping anybody that I'm responsible with if I get paralyzed in those thoughts? That's the thing. When you dwell, you get stuck. When you get stuck, you're no longer resourceful to figure out what to do. But if you push and you just focus not on good things, because let's be honest, not every day is a good day. But if you focus and say to yourself, you know what, this feels funny, this doesn't feel right, but I got to keep pushing until I see something. I think people have to create goals for themselves that's for them, not big goals. So like Hanlie was saying, like people go so big and then they crash. Why? That goal wasn't customized for you. Like for example, somebody will go, I'll go on a diet, right? Yeah, but you're at McDonald's parking lot. Like you know what I mean? You gotta kind of be realistic with your goals. You might just say, you know what? If I go to McDonald's, maybe I don't get the fries. That's incremental. You got to make incremental changes. So I think it's a balance. For me, I keep informed, but I don't dwell because I know my triggers. If I dwell, I got paralysis. If I can't help the people that depend on me. So I know, you know what, I don't need to watch the news as much. I need to stay informed because I am an adult, I am a parent, I am a spouse, but I can't dwell. I can't do anybody any good if I'm stuck.
Definitely.
And that's a challenge with individuals. They get stuck and then it's hard for them to be resourceful.
Great. Thank you.
Hopefully that makes sense, Carla.
It definitely does. Thank you. Hanlie, anything that you would add to that?
For me, it's about empathy. That's it. When there are things happening and you need to say something, is to start off by trying to have empathy for that situation, for the people in that situation, for yourself in that situation. And then you got to step up.
Yeah.
And you just cannot get away from that. You got to take it on the chin, you got to step up and you got to do it. The end. Because if you don't, nothing can move, nothing can change. And yes, that is risky. Yes, you will feel vulnerable. Yes, it might endanger your job, it might endanger your relationships at work. But there comes a time that I think that with empathy, you do need to address whatever is happening, if it is harmful to other people, if it is harmful to society as a whole. And then you just got to take it on the chin. I honestly don't think you can get around some of those things.
Yeah. One more thing I like to add, Carly. Whenever I'm going through a tough time or I'm seeing a tough scenario in the world or life, I always close my eyes and I think about the darkest and hardest time I ever had in my life. And then I imagine how I felt while I was going through it. And then I imagine how I felt after I got through it and I made it to the other side. Use your past baggage and demons in dark places as your fuel to propel you.
Absolutely.
Because it can propel you. I think sometimes we forget how far we come. We forget, right? We forget how I was in our 20s and how I was in our 30s. Sometimes close your eyes. Think about that time where you felt like the sky was falling, but all of a sudden you figured it out. Guess what? You're that same person. Those emotions are still coming out of you. I always tell this story. So when I was little, I was trying to learn how to ride a bike. And I kept falling. And my grandmother was like, keep trying. So I kept falling. And then I fell and I scraped my knee. And I said, I don't want to ride this stupid bike. That's what I said. Kicked it. And she said to me, she said, are you mad that you keep falling, or are you mad because you can't figure it out? I said both. She said, well, get mad enough to pick it up and get back on it and then walk away. It's the same emotion. You just got to readjust it. You got to redirect it. It all comes out of you. It's how you got it. That's all.
I was just going to add one thing, which you were speaking to too, in this idea of empathy and also disruption. That, I keep trying to remember that when we're going through our darkest moments, if we can have empathy for other people, when we're going through transformation, I think about the shitty things that I might have said or done, or, when I was at my worst. And when people are going through this kind of change and being hit from so many fronts, that everyone is struggling to kind of figure out where they stand and what the right place is and what their intentions are. And I think extending, it doesn't mean that you don't address, like you were saying, Hanlie, like there's still things that need to be dealt with and conversations that we need to have, but having that empathy too, to understand that everyone is really struggling, no matter where you are, with what the right answers are and where they stand. And as we transform, we don't always know. There's just a mess. There's a messy process, and to extend a bit of compassion to everyone who's transforming right now.